We're so glad you joined us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Our prayer is that you're encouraged and challenged in your relationship with Jesus. Be blessed as you listen to this week's message.
You glad to be in God's house this morning? I know I am. Look, today is actually a special treat for me because this is my first time to get to share with you guys in our brand new building. It doesn't get old saying that, right? I'm so happy that as soon as I finish, which won't be this time, like in 10 minutes racing to get out of Cinemark, that we can just take our time and unpack this message, this idea that we're going into. So today, I have the special privilege of kicking off a brand new series. I actually see Chris Neal. Hey, Chris, I didn't see you. Welcome back. So I'm kicking off a brand new series today. You see it right up here, Breathing Room. I love the fact that we get to look at this very important idea, especially after we've come out of a very busy season, especially. Because breathing room, I think, is something that we need to make sure that we're constantly applying it to our life. But now, what is breathing room, right? Okay, so for those of you that don't know, I'm a graphic designer by trade. So welcome today to Graphic Design 101. I'll be walking you through a few different things. And first up, let me just tell you, there is no greater joy for me as a graphic designer than when I'm working with established brands that they send over a little package called a style guide. So now a style guide, for the uninitiated here, a style guide is something that a company sends over that has all of their colors, all of their fonts, all of their logos, and they say this is how you do use it, and very importantly, this is how you don't use it. Now, one of the things that they specify in how to not use their logos or their headlines or any other taglines is something called the defined clear space for their logo. So we're going to have some examples up on here. Welcome to class. So you see here, LinkedIn, Squarespace. Notice these little margins on the outside, right? Because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about breathing room. So you notice that there's a defined space on the outside, which in the industry terms is called clear space. But that's essentially what we're talking about. We can go through a few other ones. The Opera logo, both stacked and horizontal. And you have a certain amount. LSU for all you LSU fans? But the point being that all of these brands, they specify this, and the reason that it's important is because if something gets closer than what they've defined as the acceptable clear space around their logo, it impedes the logo's ability to communicate effectively, consistently, and clearly. So if we're talking about the role of margins in our life, if we can kind of compare it to what we're seeing here at work in all these great companies' logos, is that we as people, with our faith, with our life, we have a message, we have a brand, if you will. We have something that we live for that's greater than ourselves. And in a way, if you look at logos, logos are what you call a brand at a glance. If you see a logo, how many times you see the side of my shoe? You know what that is. You don't have to read the back. You know exactly what it is because everybody knows the Nike swoosh. But the thing is, if I do something to obscure it or to clutter it, now all of a sudden it can't communicate what that brand is, and it gets in the way. So the same way, if we don't respect the clear space in our life, if we don't establish margins, if we don't establish boundaries, I think that we run the risk of affecting our clarity, we're on the risk of affecting our effectiveness, and we're going to be harping on that. I'm going to keep coming back to that all day today because I think that we don't just talk about promoting growth, we're talking about promoting healthy growth. We want you guys not to just, we don't want this church just to grow in number. We want it to grow in number of people that are effective for the kingdom of God. That you're actually experiencing something here on the inside that's changing you forever so that you have something to offer when the next set of people come in. Can I hear an amen? That's what we're here for. So if you came here to learn, I'm not going to just teach you about graphic design. I'm going to teach you about a lot more, but that's what we're going to walk through today. We're talking about breathing room and establishing those margins, establishing that clear space that we don't allow things to come in and clutter our life. Because you know what? I think the natural state of our lives is for it to get frantic, for the pace of our life to get busy. And I think that things, as a result, then can come in. And it can get crowded, it can get messy. And when we get messy, we make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, we lose our effectiveness, right? So let's just look at how we can establish some margins. I think over the next several weeks, we're going to be looking at some awesome topics that relate to specific areas of our life. But to start things off today, I'm going to be talking about time and how we establish margins, how we establish breathing room in our time. So time is a vast topic, right? Cue the Cosmos music. How many of you guys like that show? I love the little ship of the imagination, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm a super science nerd with that stuff. Readily admit it. I'll throw myself under the bus. But time is such a vast thing, right? It's so big. And when you think about it, when you put us next to time, so if time is this whole stage, then our moment in time, you'd probably need like some electron microscope to see it on the floor because it's that small. So in the grand scheme of things, time is such a huge thing, and our place in it is so small. We have a very defined beginning and end. The Bible says that our life is like a vapor in the wind. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. And I'm not saying that to be morbid. Yes, we're born, we live, we die. And that is life in a nutshell. It's part of the human experience. But again, I'm not saying that to kind of like diminish the scope of our life. In fact, quite the opposite. What I'm saying is that if we can establish these margins, if we can look at that our life has a beginning and a clearly defined end, then we can start to see that there's something important about that middle part, right? So the first thing that we can look at with margins, why don't we look at Ephesians chapter 5? We're going to put that up on the screen. How many of you guys have like an actual physical Bible? Do you need time to turn there? Okay, look, we got a few. The real MVPs here. Okay, I'll give you time to turn to Ephesians chapter 5. For the rest of you can queue up your app, and also you can follow on the screen. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15. We're reading out of the New Living Translation. It says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise." I think that bears repeating. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. This one says, "Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise." It says, "Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days." Other translations say, "in these desperate times." It says, "Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do." So there's a lot of mention of understanding, of wisdom, of being careful. And I think that those are all things that bear repeating, because if we're talking about effectiveness today, then if you want to learn how to live effectively, look here. Be careful. Don't live like a fool, but live wise. Gain understanding. And I think that one of the first ways that we can gain understanding about our time and the time that we have is by understanding the clear margins that our life has. And that is, it has a beginning as it has an end. So the time in the middle, the brief measure of time that each and every one of us has been given, then is significant. And I think that's the first thing that margins do. Margins indicate significance. That's how we can use them as a tool in our life. Because if we understand that we don't have forever, that we have a certain amount of time that's been allotted to each and every one of us, however long that may be. Some people get a lot of time, some people don't get enough time. But with the time that we have is the time we've been given, and because of that, it's significant. Time is a precious commodity because it's in limited quantity. So let's look at an example here. Some more graphic design, right? Here we go. Welcome back to the classroom. Look at this page right here where the type is set. You have one page where all of this lettering is placed, the nature of a place, and then all this little typeset text. But the thing is, if I wanted to effectively place that type on the page, I need to know where the margins of the page are. If I just open up a new document and I need to click all this in, somebody gives me a job, I get a brief, I need to put all this stuff on a page, but I have no idea where the page begins or ends. I'm just zoomed all the way in on the page. If I just start typing and start laying out this message right here, I run the risk of running too close to the margin, running over the margin, and all of a sudden, I'm not being effective in my placement of my message. So if we think about our life as being like this page, if we know that we have a beginning and end, then we'll be very strategic about doing what we need to do with the time that we've been given. But if, like this page, we're not aware of the margins, if we're just living like, hey, there's no end to tomorrow, tomorrow will never come, that sort of thing, then we won't be judicious, we won't be strategic about the way that we live our life, and we won't emphasize the fact that we do, in fact, have a message. We'll miss the idea that our life has significance because we're not being aware of the margins. So let's look at that. If you have a beginning and you have an end, those are the margins of your life, then that middle part is significant. You have significance. What does the Ephesians say? It says, make the most of every moment. So I'm telling you here, it's not just me telling you to be effective. We've been given a divine mandate to make the most of every moment. So this life that you've been given, it's a precious gift that you've been entrusted with. Other translations, I think the King James says to redeem the time, to buy it back, literally. I love that translation because for one, it's just very poetic. But then on top of that, think about this. We've been given something that's so precious that we need to make sure that we squeeze every bit of usefulness out of it. And I don't think that you can effectively do that if you don't first start with the fact that this doesn't last forever. So get with it. Are you awake this morning? You need to get with it. You've been given a mission. You've been given a purpose. And it's a purpose only for you. And it lies within the margins of your life. So make the most of the page that you've been given to write on and get the message out that you need to get out. So margins, for one, they indicate significance. They show us that we don't have forever to do what we need to do. So be aware of that. Because if you're aware of the margins, then you're aware of the significance that the time that you have, which is limited, has. But moving on, we're going to be working a little bit kind of like large to small this morning. And we started with the vastness of time, right? But now we're going to be moving a little closer. And if we look at our time as discrete portions, we can look at them as seasons. Because our life is constantly changing. You know, I've been the same person. I've been Samuel Gasc since the day I was born. But the thing is, Samuel Gasc has looked at different ways at different times in his life. I'm speaking in the third person. It's kind of weird. But little Sam, he was an interesting kid. And as he got older, I heard the laugh. I have stories about her too. She was an interesting kid too. But anyway, little Sam Gasc, you know, he grows up and he likes sharks and Civil War and Star Wars and all this stuff. But you know what? As he gets older, then he likes video games because he never could have a console of his own. So he had to go to friends' houses. But Sam progressed through the years and he changed and he entered into different seasons. But the thing is, I think that if we start to look at different portions of our life as different seasons of our life, we can see that those seasons, in fact, also have margins. So I think that margins in our life serve us to define seasons. That is my second point for those that are taking notes. So if margins define seasons, and we know that at every season, like think about yourself as a kid. Think about yourself at different distinct ages, right? You've always been the same person, but you understood things differently at different times. The Bible even says, you know, when I was a child, I thought I was a child, but when I became an adult, I put away childish things. So every one of you who's sitting here, you know that you've experienced life and you've filtered the information that you've received different ways at different times. And because of that, you know that you have entered into different seasons. Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 3. I was looking a lot through Ecclesiastes yesterday preparing for this. There's some good stuff in there. So again, I'll give the people with a physical copy a little time to turn to Ecclesiastes. And we're going to be looking at verse 1 through 8. You can read along with me. It says, there's an opportune time to do things, a right time for everything on the earth, a right time for birth and another for death, a right time to plant and another to reap, a right time to kill and another to heal, a right time to destroy and another to construct, a right time to cry and another to laugh, a right time to lament and another to cheer, a right time to make love and another to abstain. We're all adults here, right? Got a little adult really quick right there. A right time to embrace and another to part. Next slide. A right time to search and another to count your losses. A right time to hold on and another to let go. A right time to rip out and another to mend. A right time to shut up and another to speak up. A right time to love. Maybe I can read that one again. A right time to shut up and another to speak up. You don't always have to speak up. Maybe listen a little bit more. A right time to love and another to hate. A right time to wage war and another to make peace. And I go through all of that because there's so many contrasts made, right? It says there's a right time and an opportune time to do everything. But let me throw this little kink in the works there. That there's never an opportune time to do everything. Because I think that that's why Solomon then goes into this idea of there's a right time to do this and a right time to do that. But there's never necessarily an opportune time to do everything. So again, if we're talking about the margins of our life now, breaking our life apart into seasons, then we can kind of further deduce that each season now has opportune times to do specific things. And so if we're looking at how we can use margins in our life, and now we can look at further, not just that this middle of our life, the part that we were born, we live, we die, right? That this middle part, that's significant, right? You've been given a message. You've been given a purpose that only you can accomplish, and it's encased within the beginning and the end of your life, so make the most of it. But now I'm telling you further to make the most of the seasons, because you know that you've been different in all those different seasons, but every one of those seasons has presented you with distinct opportunities to grow in specific ways. And I'm going to further tell you that if you're not making the most of every season, then you're going directly against what we looked at the very beginning, Ephesians 5. Make the most of every opportunity. Because you know what? Certain opportunities will only exist in current seasons, or in certain seasons, rather. And you know what? Some of you may be in the worst season of your life. You may be in the best season of your life, but I want to remind you about the margins, that the season that you're in, whether it's great or whether it's bad, it has a beginning and it has an end. So make the most of the season that you're in, because you don't necessarily know when you're going to use up the usefulness of that season. And there are certain opportunities that you've been given right now. I don't know what your life may look like right now, but I'm telling you that whether it's good, whether it's bad, there is something for you to accomplish. There's something for you to learn. We're talking about effectiveness this morning, right? And so if we're talking about how margins can increase our effectiveness, I think that we first need to realize that yes, the amount of time that we've been given on earth is significant because it has a beginning and it has an end. But now within that time, there are smaller portions of time that within each one of those seasons, within each one of those portions, whichever one you might find yourself in right now, one of increase, maybe one of loss, maybe one of sickness, maybe one of health. You know, that's what I love about Solomon, how he goes through, that there's a time for everything, that we'll experience a full range of things throughout our life. And it'll never be exactly the same as the last season. So that's why I'm telling you, wherever you are right now, make sure you're making the most of it, because that's the mandate that you've been given. You've been told, make the most of every opportunity. And you can't do that if you're not respecting the fact that even if this season sucks, and you're neglecting the fact that, you know what, I'm just going to wait for the next season. Well, then you know what? At that point, you're like the person that's not recognizing the margins of the page. Because whenever that chapter closes and you switch the page, how many of you know it would be really confusing to read a book if in the last chapter, now all of a sudden it didn't explain why I'm reading what I'm reading now? You can't effectively build a story or a narrative. We call that plot holes, right? How many of you guys watch a show and you're like, wait, I don't remember them explaining that. It's cheap, right? So you don't want to have a cheap life. You don't want all of a sudden now, well, hey, no, I recognize that I need to do this because this is a season I actually like. No, you need to accomplish what you need to accomplish right now, because you may not have another chance to do it because life is constantly changing, right? These evil times, these desperate times, life is frantic and life is busy. So right now is the opportunity that you have to make the most of this opportunity. So that's my challenge to you this morning, to recognize that the margins of your life, both at the beginning and at the end, indicate that it's significant, what you have been given. That our time is a precious gift and it's a precious commodity because we've only been given what we've been given. So we need to recognize that this middle portion, this is ours to use, ours to make the most of. And that's how we live wise. That's how we live wisely. We gain understanding by knowing that we have a beginning and we have an end, and so time is precious because time is limited. And now we further look that the seasons of our life are also defined by margins, also defined by beginnings and by ends. So we recognize that if we're supposed to make the most of every opportunity, and opportunities are constantly changing, then I'm challenging you today, whatever season you're in, make the most of the opportunities of that season, because they won't repeat themselves. But you know, we've been talking a lot about this idea of how margins increase our effectiveness and increase our productivity. But the thing is, I think that we also need to highlight another aspect of margins, and that is margin as a restraint. So we've been talking a lot about doing, right? But then there's also an aspect of margin that applies to how we also hold back. What was that part in Ecclesiastes, a time to shut up, right? There's maybe some times where you don't necessarily need to do something, but rather you need to learn something. And I think that one of the most effective ways that we can learn is by resting. And we do that when we recognize that margins create space for rest. Point number 3. Margins create space for rest. But the thing is, I don't think this happens naturally. There's a designer that I follow on Instagram, and I've just followed a lot of his stuff for a while now. He's a letterer. But he also shares a lot of inspirational things. And, I have a quote of his right up on here. And he said to schedule margin. He says, you'll never find margin. Margin will not happen to you. This is because we fill time automatically by habit. Remember we were talking about life gets frantic, life gets busy. We live in evil times and desperate times. So if something is important, you put it on your schedule. Similarly, if you're ever going to have margin, you need to schedule margin on your calendar. Treat margin as you do any serious commitment. For margin is an event. It's not the absence of an event. Margin itself is the event. When you schedule something else during your margin, you're effectively double booking yourself. So don't double book yourself. Can you say that with me? Don't double book yourself. Because that's how you create margin in your life. We're talking about the example of design, right? Let's put that page layout, just because it's such a pretty layout. I didn't make this, by the way. I like it. But I want to call your attention to something else. So on this page where you see all the type is set, right? There's a big margin all the way around this. I think that the designer who laid this out recognized something very important, that you don't need to fill the page with text to communicate a message that a big headline and a clear edited block of text will tell by itself. So you don't have to fill up this page. And I think that a lot of times we have this idea, because life can get frantic and life can get busy and we're constantly working, that we feel this compulsion that we need to fill up the page. That maybe people aren't going to get what I need to say, or they're not going to get what I need to do unless I'm constantly working, unless I'm constantly doing something. And so in the end, I think what we do there is we clutter up the page and we make it incoherent. So if we're not respecting the fact that all of the empty space is just as important, because you know what this empty space does at this point? It draws your eye in. It draws your eye into what's actually important. And that is a bold headline right here. It says the nature of a place. So just in the clear example of this design right here, if we can be selective about what we do and be strategic about how we do it, respecting the idea that we don't necessarily need to do everything, we just need to do what we do well. And that's why we keep talking about effectiveness this morning, because it's not about quantity. I don't ever want us ever to confuse quantity with quality, right? It's not about how much we do. It's actually more about how well we do it. That's why I think we talk about, I love the fact that both Josh and Brooke, you guys, you talk about this spirit of excellence, because it's not just about showing up and just getting it done. It doesn't matter that we get a ton of warm bodies in the room, or we have people on stage just going through the motions. No, it's about doing it with a spirit of excellence, because we know why we're doing it. If we know that the message that we have is that significant, if we know that what we have to do is so important, then why are we not respecting the margins of our life so many times? We overwork ourselves to the point of exhaustion. We don't recognize the fact that we need to also make use of that free space, right? That it's there for a reason, because if we allow that free space to remain free space, it'll highlight the significance of what we're pouring all of our heart into. I love the fact that Josh is kind of leading by example with this, because he asked me to prepare this message for today and get stuff started because they were on vacation. Yeah, let's give it up for that, because they need a rest. Let's give them a hand clap, actually. All the work that we've been doing, they've been leading the way and leading by example all of this past season of really big busyness and getting all of this ready. But the thing is, he recognized the fact that if he was actually going to rest now this past week in beautiful Colorado, taking photos that I'm so jealous of, he recognized that if he was actually going to rest, then he needed to rest. And I think that so many times we can do what Sean McCabe was saying, that we can double book ourselves. We can say, you know what, I'm going to rest, but now I'm actually not really resting. I'm guilty of that big time. That I get home after a long day of work and I'm like, okay, I need to rest, but I'm like having in the back of my head a million different little design projects I need to get done. But the thing is, margin is important. That free space, that clear space, right? It's important, because if I'm allowing things to clutter that space that should be free, then I'm affecting my ability to be effective. And that's the mandate that we've been given this morning, right? Let's look at Ephesians 5 again, or rather just recall it this morning, that we've been given a mandate to make the most of every opportunity. If you don't leave with anything else, I want you to remember that. To make the most of every opportunity, because you only have one shot. You have one shot. You were born, you came into this life, and you've been given the opportunity that you've been given, and you can rail against it, you can complain about it, you can talk about all of the maybe disadvantages that you have, but the thing is, you've been given an opportunity. Are you making the most of it? Am I making the most of it? This is a personal question. It's a personal challenge this morning. Do you recognize that the margins of your life actually indicate a very significant portion is contained in the middle? And if you're not making the most of it, then it's not just you that's losing. I love the fact that I've been able to talk with you guys a few times this year, and then at different times I've talked about this idea of personal responsibility and collective responsibility, right? How many of you guys actually remember the sermons that I preached? But I love the idea that our faith is not just about us. That this life in general, it's not just about our faith, because our faith is our life, but rather all of this life, it's not just about us. We live this life first and foremost for God. We surrender it to Him, and we, like the song was saying, we build our foundation, or rather we build our life on the foundation that He provides, because then everything else makes sense. So if we're building on that foundation, we recognize that we have a personal responsibility to build our life, but now we also need to recognize that there's a collective responsibility, that what I'm doing here matters for other people out there. And that's a responsibility that we have collectively as a church. And if we don't recognize that, then we're not going to make the most of the opportunities that we're given, right? So we have the margins that encase a significant portion of our life. We have the margins that define the seasons of our life. And those seasons contain opportunities that are specific to those individual seasons. What season are you in right now? What does it look like? Think about that for a second. You know that there are some things that you like about it and there's some things that you hate about it. I can probably almost guarantee that. But no matter what your season may actually look like this morning, I want to encourage you that there is a reason for the season. Kind of like Christmas. Sorry, that was too easy. But there is actually a reason for the season that you're in. There's a specific purpose that's been given to you. Just like the amount of time that you've been given is precious, the limited time that you've been given in this season is also precious. So recognize the margins. Recognize that it will begin and it will end. So if this is a horrible season, it won't last forever. I want to remind you that. The band can actually come up as we close. But then I remember we look at the last portion and it says that margins create space for rest. And this is important, I think, because of the fact that if we're not resting, if we're working tirelessly, if we're working without ever ending our toil, if we're speaking without drinking water, we'll lose our effectiveness. But if you're like me, you start to wonder, then how do I know that I'm actually doing the right things? Because if we're talking about like the example of the page and all of this free space that's around it, I think that in the back of most of our minds, we can start to wonder, maybe I should have added something else. Maybe I should have said one more thing. And I think that doubt can easily creep in when we're worrying about maybe I should do more. And then we're starting to allow that doubt and that worry to interfere with our ability to rest. Because now we're compelled that it's like, oh man, I don't think I did what I need to do. I don't think I did everything that I had to do. And so we start to interfere with our rest. We start to invade the margins of our rest. And now we lose our effectiveness in the season that we're in. So how do we know that we can actually rest? Let's look at one more verse. Matthew chapter 11. I love this one. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, end of the chapter. New Living Translation says, "Then Jesus said, 'Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light.'" I'm actually going to read it one more time out of the Message, because when I was reading it yesterday, I was just like, man, this is it right here. It says, "Are you tired, worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely. You'll learn to live lightly." And that last little part kind of jumped out to me because I don't know how many of you guys remember, I preached a sermon a little while back that was talking about running and the importance of running lightly. I think that if we're going to maximize our effectiveness by also learning the need for rest, the only way that we can properly do that and do it without worrying with maybe I didn't do enough or maybe I didn't do everything, the only way that I think that we can actually rest is when we trust in the one who can give us rest. And that's Jesus. His call to the people that were following him, his call to the people that are coming to him, to you today, is he says, come to me if you're tired, if you're worn out, if you feel that you've been stretched to your limits, come to me. If you want to learn to rest, come to Jesus this morning. I can't tell you, because I can share practical wisdom with you all the day long, but there's nothing that's going to give you real rest like coming to Jesus and just laying it at his feet. He's telling you, if you want to learn how to actually rest, come learn from me. That was his call. He says, come learn the unforced rhythms of grace, that there is an actual rhythm to this. There's a way that we go through this life in a way that's light, that it's not overworking ourselves, that it's not overstressing ourselves, but rather it's about being strategic and being effective with the opportunity that we've been given right in this moment. And as I say that, I know that there's something coming to mind. Maybe something you've neglected, maybe something that you've put off, maybe something that you thought about, maybe this isn't the time. But I'm telling you, time is short. Seasons end. Do what you need to do so that you can rest. Because this isn't about just working until you die. This isn't about working until you collapse out of exhaustion and then you're no good to anybody. How many of you know that after a long day, if you've just been going nonstop, and then that one person asks you, probably your spouse, can you do this for me? You're just like, I'm done. You had enough because you stretched yourself too far. So Jesus is calling you this morning. The Spirit is reaching out to your heart right now. And I think that God is telling you that you need to rest. You need to respect the fact that margins are there to create space in your life so that you know how important it is to make the most of the opportunity when you have it. Instead of putting it off and then now all of a sudden you have to work extra hard just to get the last thing done so you can do the other things that you need to do, and it just compiles and it compiles and it compiles. And it builds up and you're overworking yourself. So be faithful to the season. Recognize that the margins of your life indicate a significant portion of your life has been given to you. Make the most of it. Recognize that those margins also define your seasons. Every season will be different, so make the most of the opportunities and the seasons that you find yourself, especially the one right now. Don't worry about the next one. The next one will bring with it its own problems, its own triumphs, its own opportunities. But the opportunities you have right now are the ones you need to be faithful to. So make the most of those opportunities. And then third, recognize that you need to create space for rest. And if you want to learn to rest, come to Jesus. If you guys would stand up on your feet, that's my call to you this morning. I don't know what you might be dealing with. I don't know what you might be carrying. But I love the picture that Jesus says in Matthew 11 when he's teaching these people. He says, come to me, all you who are weary, who are heavy laden. What that very simply means is you're carrying a heavy burden. Are you carrying a heavy burden this morning? Have you been working to the point of exhaustion? Do you not know when to call it quits on certain things? Have you found it difficult to find rest? Well, Jesus is saying, come. He's saying, come to me. Learn how to live the way that I live. Learn those unforced rhythms of grace, because the time that we've been given is a time that's been filled with grace. And that grace is the provision that we need to do what we need to do. Because we don't have to worry about the fact that I may not do everything that I need to do. Because you know what? If we're trusting on Jesus, if we're relying on Jesus, then I think that we can rest assured in the security that the foundation we're building on is enough. That the grace that we've been given is enough to do what we need to do. So stop worrying, stop doubting, stop working frantically, and learn to rest. You need it. Your mind needs it. Your body needs it. Your spirit needs it. Why don't you close your eyes with me this morning as we close? Lord, I thank you. I thank you for what you've been doing in our hearts. I thank you for what you've been doing in our life. Father, I thank you for what you've been doing in mine. I thank you that I get this opportunity to share not just a word, but Father, something you've been working out in my life, Lord. And I pray that as people recognize the moment that they're in right now, I pray that what I've spoken here this morning, Lord, that you would take it, that you would let it be seed that's planted in the ground of their heart, that it would take root, Lord. Father, I pray that it would just sprout into something that brings life. Father, that it opens their eyes to see the need for them to rest. And Father, I pray that you would just show them that there's no greater rest than the rest that you give. There's no greater rest for the mind that's anxious. There's no greater rest for the heart that's full of trouble. There's no greater rest for the body that's worn out than the rest that you have to offer.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message from Anchor Chapel. If you'd like to support the ministry of Anchor Chapel, you can easily do so on our website at anchorchapel.com or follow us on social media at Anchor Chapel. God bless. We'll see you next week.